Welcome to the Addition Financial webinar, Credit Health Checkup. Our speakers tonight, Katie Bowman, Kelly McNeil, and Rod Griffin, are sharing their expertise from community engagement and partnerships, digital services, and Experian, respectively. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and we will answer them during our Q&A session towards the end of the presentation. And now, I'll hand it over to Katie.
Thanks, Nicole. Tonight, we're talking about our credit health. And just like our physical health, our finances require annual checkups too. So tonight, we're going to teach everyone how to gauge their financial wellness by looking a little closer at their credit. We're going to explore some common myths about credit, discuss how to handle financial hardships, provide some options if you're experiencing tough times managing debt, and review some lessons learned about our credit history. We've all been told usually that having good credit is a major part of financial wellness. And we know that the higher our credit score, the more opportunities we'll have to save on interest with lenders. But we've also sat around the dinner table with our family and friends and had the, well, I hear if you do this, you can fill in the blank with whatever you want, your credit will go up right away, or don't do that, it'll destroy your credit. So tonight, we're going to dispel and debunk some of those more common credit myths, starting with myth 1. And I'll hand it over to Rod.
Katie, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, and good evening, and thank you for being here. And it's so important to understand credit, and this is probably one of the most common things I hear too. The more debt you have, the lower your score. That's not really true. The devil's in the details. You can have a mortgage loan and an auto loan and carry debt so long as you are paying it as agreed and on time, and it's going to help build your credit history and your credit scores over time as you pay down those debts. So the total debt you have is not necessarily bad for your credit score, so long as it's not more than you can manage. On the other hand, the amount of credit or debt, that you have on your credit cards is very important. What we call balance to limit ratio, or your utilization rate on credit cards, is crucial. The more debt you have on a credit card as compared to its limit, the more it's going to hurt your scores. That is, in fact, the second most important factor in credit scores. So you want to keep your credit card balances as low as possible. Ideally, from a credit reporting and scoring standpoint, if you can pay your credit card balances off in full each month, that's the best thing you can do. So the takeaway is more debt on your credit cards is bad for your scores, but more debt in general isn't necessarily, so long as you're managing it well.
Great. And we're going to jump into myth number 2. And that myth is that one late payment won't hurt your score too much. Well, unfortunately, that's not true. It is a myth, because payment history accounts for a huge part of what makes up your credit score. So one missed payment, even if all your other bills are always paid on time in full, can really do a lot of damage to your credit score. So even if you're only a month or two behind on a payment, this is really the fastest way to destroy your credit score. And it doesn't go away as quickly or as easily. Late payments can remain on your credit report even after you've caught up. So we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive, because Rod and I have both mentioned the factors that make up your credit score. So we're going to review those real quick before we get into the other myths. So Rod has already mentioned this, but 35% of your credit is made up of your payment history. So that's why we say don't ever miss a payment, not even one. If you think you're going to be late, or you don't have your payment in full on time, communicate with your lender. Communication is key. Give them a call, let them know what's going on with your situation. Most lenders will be accommodating with extensions or grace periods if you communicate to them and it's not a recurring issue or request you have. But just ignoring your bills, not opening the mail is not going to make them go away. So payment history is a big one. Next, 30% of your credit score is made up of the amount you owe. And Rod also touched on this. Many people focus their attention on the more minor factors like inquiries rather than making payments on time or keeping debt low. But your debt to credit ratio, which is also known as what Rod referred to as utilization or debt to credit rate, generally represents the amount of revolving credit that you're using. And it's divided by the total amount of the debt available to you, also known as your credit limits. So when we talk about revolving credit accounts, those include things like credit cards or lines of credit. And as a general rule, typically we say it's a good idea to keep your credit utilization below 30%. Once you start to use more than that 30% of your available credit, you may start to see that score dip or drop. People who use less of their available credit are considered a lower risk to lenders. Your debt to credit ratio is only one of the factors that impact your score, but it's one that you can use to influence your score in a matter of weeks. Another part of your credit score is comprised of the length of credit history. So 15% of your score depends on the history that is beneficial to credit scores. So closing an older account, in theory, could have a more negative impact. When you are considering length of credit history, the scoring formula usually evaluates the age of your oldest and newest accounts, along with the average of all accounts. So let's look at this example. The minimum amount of credit history needed to generate a Fico score is 6 months or more on at least one credit account. Closed credit accounts with zero balance and no associated negative information, so no late payments, typically remains on your credit history for 10 years from the date they're reported closed. So length of credit history plays a pretty important role. Then we move into the two 10% factors, which are types of credit and new credit. Types of credit just refers to having a diverse range of credit products. So that means different types of credit like installment loans, auto loans, student loans, mortgages, and then you have your bank or retail credit cards. So having many different kinds of credit, not just 5 credit cards, is going to impact your score. And then the new credit, this accounts for your history of applying for new credit. So when you apply for new credit, inquiries can remain on your credit report for 2 years. However, FICO scores only consider inquiries from the last 12 months. So that was the really fast overview of what makes up our credit scores. And I know it went by quick, but think of it as a syllabus that you get when you go to class and what makes up your grade. So now that you know all these factors, you know maybe where you need to spend a little more time and what can impact your score more than something else. All right. And we're going to jump over to myth number 3 with you, Rod.
Well, thank you again. And I actually was having this conversation with somebody today. What happens when you get married? And a lot of the myth is that when you get married, you are merging your lives, and so your credit reports get merged too. And in fact, that's not true. Everyone has their own individual credit report in the U.S. credit reporting system, and that doesn't change when you get married. When you get married, if you make accounts joint, that account would then appear on both credit reports. So it would be on your report and your spouse's, but the reports would continue to be separate. That's important because if you have accounts or debts from prior to the marriage, and they're not joint, they would still be on your credit report and could affect lending decisions as a couple. So if you're going to apply for a mortgage, for example, the mortgage lender is going to look at both reports, but they'll be separately. You and your spouse's reports will both be considered. So it's important that you both take care of your reports and you both have good credit scores, but they don't get merged. You'll have your own reports and you'll still have your own credit scores. So always keep that in mind. Getting married joins your lives, but it doesn't join your credit reports.
Okay, we're going to jump into myth 4. Checking your credit will lower your score. So people really get fixated on some of the more minor parts of what makes up your credit score. And one thing we see in financial services is people really get hung up on inquiries or checking credit. So when you apply for a loan, it results in something called a hard credit inquiry. And this happens when a potential lender pulls your credit history and they're trying to decide if they should approve you for the credit card or loan, whatever you're applying for, based on your history as a borrower. So only hard inquiries negatively impact a borrower's score. For most people, it really is only like fewer than 5 points, and inquiries fall off your report after 2 years, but those both can vary. Multiple credit inquiries over a short time frame, such as applying for 5 credit cards or something within a week, can definitely multiply damage to your credit score. However, if you're shopping around for, let's say, a car, other types of credit like that auto loan, Fico recognizes that borrowers are going to shop around, they're going to shop rates. So inquiries from multiple mortgages or auto loans or student loan applications won't hurt your score for 30 days. Accessing your own report periodically is not going to hurt your score. Using services, tools, apps like Credit Karma is not going to hurt your score, or on your credit card app, usually they will have a place for you to check your score. Looking at that is not going to hurt your score. Pre-approval offers will not negatively affect your score. And the other thing people get a little bit leery about is employment inquiries. So when an employer goes to pull your credit, they can only do that with your consent during that application process. We're going to jump into myth number 5, which is paying off your credit card each month is bad. This myth is usually followed by something along the lines of leaving a small balance or percentage on your credit card from month to month, or only paying a minimum. And with that, I think the line of thought there must be that you are trying to show activity. However, you don't need to leave a balance on your card from month to month in order for creditors or the credit bureaus to see credit activity. So paying off a credit card each month is not going to hurt your score or really help it significantly either way. It really depends again on that credit utilization, but who wants to pay interest? Pay those things off each month if you can. Keep in mind, charging and paying off credit cards each month will not quickly or significantly boost your score, but paying off credit card balances is beneficial to your score because it lowers your credit utilization ratio. So remember, the utilization is the amount of available credit you're using, and it is the second most important factor in credit scores, right behind your payment history. So pay your credit cards off if you can. Leaving a balance on them month to month is a slippery slope, and it's an easy way to find yourself in debt. So I'm going to pass it back over to Rod, and he's going to tell us more about what to do if you do find yourself in some debt and you're denied credit.
Thanks, Katie. When I first saw this title for this slide, I thought, oh boy, we're going to talk about dating. I am the wrong person for that. I don't handle rejection well at all. But in the case of credit, I can share some information that I think will be helpful. If you find yourself in a situation where you are denied credit or don't receive the best terms and the best rates, there are several things you can do and should do. And first is review what's called an adverse action notice, or a denial letter that you should receive from the lender. It explains exactly why your application was declined. And I would also say that you shouldn't take it personally. They're looking at your financial status. It's not a judgment against you as an individual. It's looking at the likelihood you'll be able to repay a debt. And you can change those things in the credit history to change that situation. That starts with the adverse action notice or the denial letter. It will include things like an explanation of why your application was declined, so you know exactly what happened. Years ago, I applied for a car loan and was declined, and it actually had nothing to do with my credit history. It was because I just gotten out of school, had my first real job, and hadn't been at the job long enough for them to be confident I would have a steady income. So look at that adverse action notice. It will also include instructions for getting a copy of the credit report that they used in making that decision, or a credit report, more accurately, from the credit bureau that they used. So you'll get a current copy of your credit report. It will include a credit score if one was used, along with a description of what that score means and its scale and other details. And it will include a list of what we call the risk factors that affected that score. And risk factors are just statements that explain what from your credit report most affected that number. So those risk factors empower you to look at your credit report, know exactly what you need to work on to help improve that score. And if you focus on those risk factors, all of your scores will get better. So look closely at that adverse action notice and use it as a tool to help you make decisions on what steps you need to take. Make sure you review your credit report. You can get a free copy of the report from the credit bureau that the lender used if you receive an adverse action notice or you're declined. I would also mention that you can get a free copy of your credit report anytime, and you can do that now once a week at annualcreditreport.com. So be sure you're checking your credit reports. You can get at annualcreditreport.com one free from each of the national credit reporting companies, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, through April. And outside of the COVID era that we're in now, you can get one once a year, once every 12 months. So review your credit report so you know what's in there. Talk to the credit card issuer, I have trouble saying that tonight, or your lender. They can help explain the decision and help you take action and figure out what you need to do as well. They may have options for showing that you're a good risk and overcome the issues related to that adverse action notice. So you may be able to qualify in another way, maybe at different terms or higher rates, but be able to qualify. Be sure too that you're applying for credit that's within your reach. If you are applying for a home, for example, it's a good idea to get pre-qualified or pre-approved so that you know what kind of home you can afford. So you're not looking at a mansion when you should be looking at, a smaller house. Help set your expectations so that you aren't applying beyond your means. So know what's within your reach and focus on those kinds of agreements so that you can expect to be approved. Also work on improving your credit score. Credit scores are built over time, and so it takes time to improve them if you've had some difficulty. Those risk factors I mentioned are really crucial. They tell you exactly what you need to focus on. Scores, depending on the situation, if you have just one late payment, maybe you catch up on that late payment and the scores bounce up. If you have a really short credit history, it can take longer, but there are tools that you can use. And one here, for example, is Experian Boost, which lets you add your positive cell phone payments, your positive utility payments, like natural gas or electricity or water, as well as your streaming services like Netflix or Hulu or HBO Plus to your credit report. That's a service that's only been out for about a year now, and year and a half, I think, maybe two, in March. I lost track of when we launched it, but it was the first tool of its kind that lets you tell Experian what information you want to be included in your report. It's permission-based, it's free, and if you change your mind, you can tell us that you want us to stop. And it's based on your payments made through a credit card or through a checking account or savings account. So you would tell Experian what accounts you pay your utility bill through, or your cell phone bill through, or your cable bill through, and we're able to match that payment each month and pull it into your account, into your credit report as an account, which helps boost your credit scores. And what we're seeing so far is, on average, an increase for about two out of three people see an increase of about 13 points. If you have what we call a thin credit file or a short credit history, we're actually seeing increases of around 19 points for about two out of three people. So a large improvement. So something to look at. Use new tools that are available to you, and make sure you know what's in that credit report. Don't be afraid to look. I think that's, if there's one thing I can share tonight, it's that. Don't be afraid to know what's in your report, because that empowers you to take action. And I think it's still with me, so I'll keep talking. When it comes to recovery, one of the things that you may want to look at and consider is where to get help. And it's important to understand the difference between debt management or debt counseling and credit repair. I think people often can get confused by those two things. Credit counseling is a service that can help you set up a voluntary agreement with between you and your creditors, so that you're making a consolidated payment. And we'll talk about debt consolidation in a minute. But good credit counselors often are almost always nonprofit, so there's little or no cost. And before they work with you to reach agreements with your creditors, they'll work with you on a budget or a spending plan, if you don't like the term budget, but work with you on how you might repay those debts and pay down those debts without having to negotiate programs with the lenders that could have a negative effect on your credit score. And they'll help you learn what you need to do to better manage your finances overall, as well as your credit, into the future, so that you have a more successful financial future. So it's really important. A good credit counselor will do more than just say, I'll help you pay off this debt. They'll also teach you how to manage your finances better, so that you are more in control. Keep in mind, though, if you do enter into a debt management plan, what's called a DMP, the counseling agency will negotiate repayment at a reduced rate, either reduced principal or lower interest rates, for example, which will be reported as settled in your credit report. And settled is considered negative because you do not repay all of the debt as originally agreed. So it may take some time. You may not be able to qualify right away for new credit. That might be okay, though. If you're in a position where you can't manage the debts you already owe, entering into a settlement can help you be put into a better financial situation, and over time improve your credit history. So a good counselor will help you identify the right steps for you to take. I think the next slide. And I mentioned debt consolidation. That term is used in a couple of different ways. There's something we call a debt consolidation loan, which can be very beneficial in managing your debts. With a debt consolidation loan, for example, if you have a number of credit cards and you're struggling to pay those balances, the balances are increasing, you may be able to get a single loan at a lower interest rate, perhaps over a longer repayment period, that pays off all of those credit cards at once. That can help you repay the debt, because the payment on that debt consolidation loan will be lower than the total of the payments you are making on those credit cards. It's also a positive because all of those credit card debts will be shown as paid with a zero balance and paid as agreed, which means you don't have any late payments and they aren't settled. So that debt consolidation loan can be a very useful tool. And we see it often in student loans, for example. I went through that. I consolidated my student loans years ago. So it's a debt consolidation loan can help you pay off higher interest loans and multiple loans or credit card debts and consolidate them into a single loan with one payment. I would caution that if you're watching late night TV or you hear from so-called debt consolidation firms that are actually debt settlement firms, if you hear the word consolidation in the setting where an organization is telling you, if you pay us a certain amount, we will negotiate settlement of your debts. What they will also say is consolidation of your debts with your lenders. And what they mean is, your payment will be consolidated into a single check that you will give to that debt settlement firm, and then they will disperse those funds to the lenders that they've negotiated settlement with. Be careful about that because, one, you're paying them a fee, and you may be able to work with your lenders independently. The other is what they're really doing is settling your debts. And again, those debts will be reported as settled on your credit report. Every debt that's reported as settled is going to have a negative impact on your credit scores. So be aware of that. And there are instances where debt settlement firms will advise people to not pay their debts for several months so that it's easier to negotiate with your lenders. The problem with that is you're only compounding the problem that you have. You're becoming seriously delinquent or late with your payments, which is driving down your credit scores. As Katie mentioned, missing one payment is a serious issue. If you miss multiple months of payments on multiple accounts, you're going to completely wreck your credit scores before they even begin to make those payments. So understand the difference between a debt consolidation loan and a debt settlement firm that's consolidating your payments but settling your accounts with your lenders. I think that's an important distinction to make. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kelly.
Thank you, Rod. We're going to talk about balance transfers. Another way to, which is like another option that you have for consolidating your debt out there. A balance transfer is basically a credit card transaction where you're transferring existing balances from one card issuer to another. Effectively, the card issuer is sending a payment to another card issuer to pay that requested balance off on that particular card. Transferring credit card debt. Transferring this debt can be an effective money-saving method to pay down higher interest cards. You want to take the time to review the offer before submitting that request. Look at the balance and the interest on the cards that have a higher APR and compare that to the balance transfer offer. You want to look for things like, what is the interest rate on that? Is there a balance transfer fee? How long do I have to pay that balance transfer before that offer ends? So those are some things that you want to look for when you're doing or taking that time to consider whether or not that balance transfer promotion or offer that's being or that's out there for you is the option that you want to take. Ultimately, the goal is to pay off your higher balances faster while you're saving money by reducing the amount of interest that you're charged. So that's really what we're looking for in here. So that's what you want to search for when you're looking for a balance transfer. Lastly, you really want to look at the terms of the balance transfer promotion offer. Most offers or promotions have an end date for that balance transfer to be paid off. That term will vary with each card issuer. Some offers are 6 months, some issuers offer 12 months, 18 months. Whatever it is, that's one of the things that you want to look at for that term of paying that off. Once that date ends or expires, the remaining balance will revert to a higher interest that's applied to that card for your regular rate that it applies to. Most of them are listed as like cash advance. Some will be shown as a balance transfer, but those are not the promo rates. So you want to make sure that the rate and the offer that you're getting into for that balance transfer is something that you're going to be able to pay off within that time so that you're not reverting back to a higher interest for that balance that's on there. This is just an example of one of the promotions that we have ongoing, and this is kind of what you would see for there. If there's showing you a fee, what the rate is, what's the term for that. The term being, the transaction that you have from the time of the transaction that the balance transfer is begins to pay off that rate or that balance for that earned rate. And with that, I turn it over to Rod.
And back to me. Okay. It's hot potato day on subject matter. But I'm going to talk a little bit about protecting your credit, things you need to do. And we've touched on some of those things. There are things you can do to be proactive and build better habits that will help you improve your credit history over time. And so it starts with, as I mentioned, getting your credit report. You need to know where your credit currently stands. You can do that very easily if you go to www.annualcreditreport.com. That's the free annual credit report site under federal law. You can get your credit report actually free once every 7 days, about once a week right now through April at this point. And you get one, and that's one report from each of the national credit reporting companies. So you actually can get three. You can get one from Experian, one from Equifax, and one from TransUnion every week. If you need to do that or want to do that, it's important to know what's in the credit report so you can act on it. Until you know what's there, you can't do anything about it. So get your credit report, know what's in it. Look for things like identity information you don't recognize, so names or address or social security numbers. We list all of the variations that are reported to us as credit bureaus so that if there's fraud occurring, you can spot it. Those aren't errors if you see variations, although I've seen them, people have said that. They're not. Actually, they're an accurate representation of what lenders are telling us is being reported to them as belonging to you. So we want to make sure you can see that information. Look for accounts you might not recognize, payments or increases in charges that you haven't seen or aren't aware of or didn't make, so that you can act on them, but know where your credit history stands. Always make at least the minimum payment due on all of your accounts. That's essential to having good credit scores. As has been discussed, the most important thing you can do is pay your bills on time every time from a credit reporting and scoring standpoint. And take steps, again, to protect yourself from fraud. There are a lot of services available today that will give you, for example, alerts. So if you go to Experian, you can subscribe to a free monitoring service, and we will alert you if there's anything that changes in your credit report that could be an indicator of fraud. We also will monitor the dark web, which is a sort of haven for bad actors. And if we see your identity information there, we can alert you. So use the tools that are available. Often you can get subscriptions for free. As I mentioned, you can with Experian. If there's been a breach, respond to those notices. You need to make sure that you are responding so that you can protect your credit history and your other financial well-being. So know what's in that report. Be sure that you dispute information if you believe it's inaccurate. It doesn't hurt your credit report or credit history in any way to dispute. At Experian, it's really easy to do. You just go to experian.com/dispute. And if you see something you don't believe is inaccurate, you just follow the instructions. There's a button that says, I need to dispute this. We'll give you a free report if you don't already have one, in addition to all of the other free reports that you can get. So don't be afraid to engage with Experian and make sure that you're taking care of that credit history and staying on top of what's there. And we want to work with you to do that. So still me continuing. So just some life lessons to be aware of around credit. And we hear about fraud and identity theft, and sadly, the causes are often the result of what we call familiar fraud or family fraud that are resulting from friends or family stealing information. So I'll touch on that a bit. But to protect yourself and your credit, first, it sounds odd, but keep your credit cards out of children's reach. Young kids know how to shop on Amazon these days. You can use your credit card, you'll find charges you weren't ready for. They may also, in playing some of the online games, use your credit to make purchases for different levels and things. So be sure that you're keeping your cards out of your children's reach just to protect your own credit and keep your balances safe. That said, it might be a good idea to, if you have particularly a teenager, who's a junior, senior in high school, perhaps that you add as an authorized user on a credit card so that you can teach them about credit, but you don't have to give them the card. So you can go with them, help them make purchases, and then walk through the process of paying that bill on time each month and teach them about credit. That may be a teaching moment, but otherwise, make sure that you know where your credit cards are. It's also impossible. It's also important to do that when you're thinking about others who might be in your household. So if you have extended family or guests in your home, make sure that your personally identifying information and your accounts and credit cards are all secure. As I mentioned, sadly, that's where we see a lot of fraud happen, is from people so make sure you're protecting it. Be careful about giving information over the phone. Identity thieves are masters of what we call social engineering. So they will pose as a lender or as the IRS or as Experian, and none of us will call you and ask for your passwords or your account numbers. Experian won't call you at all. We don't do outbound calling. So if you get a call, be sure you know who you're talking to. And if they ask for personal identifying information, hang up. And if they claim to be your bank, go get your billing statement or go online and get your bank's customer service number and call them directly and ask. Don't give information over the phone. Don't click on pop-ups in your browsers as well. They often have viruses and other things attached to them that can hurt your security, or what we call malware that can track who you're shopping with or account numbers you're entering. Be careful about that. If you are going to spend a significant amount of money, make sure you research who you're spending money with and make sure that they're a legitimate business or organization. You don't want to be duped out of large sums of money that don't go where you think it should. Again, we mentioned checking your credit report. Do that often. Know what's there at least once a year, if not more often. If you are getting a credit card bill, make sure you know how it's coming to you. Credit card bills could come in the mail today. They may come online, or you may need to go into the website and check it yourself, or they could be delivered via the internet. So you can often choose how that happens. Make sure you know how you're going to get that bill so you know where to look for it and make sure that it's paid on time. And be careful about credit card advertisements that sound too good to be true. There is something called spoofing, and you may get an email or see a pop-up, things that look like a legitimate bank or a bank that you would know, but they've changed small things, like changed a letter in the spelling. It doesn't go to the legitimate website, and you could end up giving your identifying information to someone who isn't who it appears to be. So be careful about those credit card advertisements. If they sound too good to be true, they probably are. And that's kind of the key life lesson. Be sure that if it sounds too good to be true, it almost always is. So be aware of that. And one more thing, and I touched on it a bit earlier, it's important to understand the difference between credit counseling and credit repair. Credit counseling let me back up. Credit counseling is usually nonprofit, so there will be very little or low or no fees. And a credit counselor will require that you learn how to manage your credit and your finances better. There will be training and education to help you avoid mistakes or issues that may have caused you to have difficulty, so you don't have those same problems in the future. They also can work with your lenders and help you overcome debt problems. So a good credit counselor is going to not be easy in most cases. It's going to make you do some things that will help you avoid the problems in the future and learn and study. But that could be a good thing. But good credit counselors will help you manage your debts, but also require that you learn. Credit repair most often starts with, if you pay me, I will get that negative stuff off of your credit report. The problems with that, a lot of them. One, credit repair is governed by something called the Credit Repair Organizations Act. And the first thing that the Credit Repair Organizations Act says is that a credit repair company cannot take any funds at all, any payment up front. They have to complete the terms of a written contract before they can take a penny. So if a credit repair firm says, pay me, and then I will help you get that negative stuff off of your credit report, they've already violated federal law because they can't take payment up front, and they haven't provided you with a written contract, and they have not fulfilled the terms of that contract. The other thing they cannot do is promise to take accurate information off of your credit report. So if someone's coming to you and saying, pay me and I'll take accurate information off of your report, you probably should go the other way, because what you'll find is they'll get you deeper into trouble and take money from you that you already need for other reasons, and probably would have been better used paying down debts you already owe. So recognize credit repair, or if they say, well, fix your credit, another kind of clue, but know the difference. Good credit counselors, a good place to start is the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, or nfcc.org. There are good credit counselors in almost every community. Their members provide services. So that's one place I would recommend you start looking. And with that, we can move on to the next slide.
Okay, thanks everyone. So what's going to happen next is we're going to review some of the questions that came in when you registered and any questions that may have come in during the presentation. But before we do that, we want to leave you with a free resource. So as Rod was talking about earlier, we have partnered with a credit counseling service called In Charge Debt Solutions. We partnered with them to bring free financial counseling services to all of our members. They are a not-for-profit organization, and they offer counseling services like budget and credit card counseling, housing, debt management programs, credit report education, student loan counseling, and bankruptcy counseling and education. So we've put their toll-free phone number on the screen for you. Please feel free to reach out if you feel like you are in a place where you need some financial help, and we will be right back with you shortly.
And we're back. Thank you so much for your patience. And now I'll hand it over to Katie for the first question.
Okay, so you guys are really paying attention tonight and asking a lot of really great questions. So one of the first questions that I read that came through was, can you have hard inquiries from your credit report removed before 2 years? Also, how do collection accounts stay on one credit report but not another if the item was unfounded or removed? Shouldn't those debts be removed from all three if removed from one? So I'll start by saying, if there is some kind of identity theft or fraud or an error on a credit report that you find, you have to contact each of the three credit bureaus to have it removed if it is appearing on all three. But not all of your lines of credit or loans will appear on every bureau's credit report for you. So it could just be a case of, if it's not on one, but it's on the other two, that lender doesn't report to that credit bureau, but you, as the borrower and as the person who owns the credit score, you need to initiate with each of the three credit bureaus to have anything that is either fraud or an error removed yourself. So hard inquiries usually can't be removed from a credit report unless they are approved as fraudulent. But again, we cannot remove things from our credit report if it's actually us, even if it was when we made bad choices 20 years ago, 10 years ago. If it was really our doing, it stays on their credit report, depending on the amount of time and what we're referring to. So go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, I was jump into in the dispute process, a couple of things. When you dispute with the bureaus, what should happen is that if the source of the information, usually a lender, tells a bureau to remove what's been disputed or updates it, they are required by federal law to notify the other two credit bureaus if they've reported it to them. So Experian won't notify Equifax until you. We don't know if the lender reported the same information to them, and the law recognizes that. So what it says is if you dispute something and there's a change made, it's the responsibility of that source of information to update that and make that same change to any other consumer reporting agency it reported the information to. So credit bureaus, debit bureaus, or other kinds of consumer reporting agencies too. So it should get updated. But Katie's right. It's if you dispute something, it's a good idea to go to the other two as well and make sure that the change is made or that it's disputed. So I think that's absolutely right. The other thing with inquiries that I would mention is that they remain for 2 years if they're accurate. We can't take them off, but they only affect credit scores for, in the case of hard inquiries, for like 2 or 3 months in a significant way, because there'll either be a new account and that becomes the risk indicator, or there won't be a new account, which means the inquiry didn't result in a new debt, so it doesn't indicate risk. And Fico scores actually exclude hard inquiries after 12 months. So even though they're still in your score, in your report, they don't affect scores anymore. So you don't have to worry about them too much. So just a little more information.
Great. And Rod, I'm just going to jump around a little bit in the questions that we had sent over. So another question that came through was in reference to credit cards. How do I know if I have the right credit card for my needs? So for this question, what I would say is your first credit card typically is going to be on the higher interest side, not going to be great rewards. And it's really just to establish credit, right? So be mindful of if you leave any balances on those higher interest cards, but know that you are establishing that history. And then once you're more experienced and you have a little bit longer credit history and you have a little bit more diversity in the types of credit lines you have, then it's time to shop around for different types of credit cards. Typically, we say to stay away from the store cards, especially if they don't have the Visa logo, MasterCard, American Express. If they're only allowed to be used in that store, stay away from it. It's not going to serve you. It's just going to be an easier way to forget to make a payment, get yourself into trouble with some debt or negative credit score. But the rewards are just going to depend on what you enjoy or what benefits you most. If you don't like to travel or you have a fear of flying, probably you don't want the Southwest card, right? But there are a lot of cards out there that have great reward programs. And if it's gas or points or travel, it just depends on your lifestyle. And again, as your credit goes up, you will have more opportunities for better rewards programs and better point systems on those credit cards. So shop around, keep your eye on the fine print, and you don't have to take every offer that's sent to you in the mail. Really only open a credit card if you have a need or it's a goal of yours. Like I had a goal of opening a Southwest credit card because I love to travel and I really want to try to get the companion pass for my spouse. But just opening credit cards because they're being mailed to you, the offers, it's not a good idea. So just make sure you have a reason for opening a new card.
Katie, this is, I wanted to chime in a little bit on that too, as far as the part about what card is right for me and what isn't. Another option to kind of take into consideration for that is, do you usually pay your balance down or are you carrying one? So if you're having trouble determining, should I go for that lower rate or should I earn the rewards? If you're someone who is going to carry a balance, you might want to gear towards that lower rate interest card as opposed to the reward card where you may be earning a higher interest rate on there. But if I'm someone who is paying my balances off every month, then I would want that rewards because I'm not going to have to worry about that interest rate.
Great point. Thanks, Kelly. I see an easy one for us. And Rod, are you able to put the free annual credit report website in the chat for everyone?
Sure. I think it will go to everyone. Let me try here.
Okay.
It's so pretty straightforward to get to Boost. It's www.experian.com/boost.
Okay. And then for the free copy of annual credit reports, can you put that website as well?
That as
That's
well.
all right. No, we want both. We want all of them.
I have Boost on my brain these days. And that's the free credit report, www.annualcreditreport.com.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna jump around. Is there another question, Rod, that you saw that you want to answer?
Well, just someone is thinking about Boost that somebody asked if your payments are made by check, can you use Boost? The answer is yes. So if you're paying by check, you can have Boost check your checking account for that payment. So that will work.
Okay, great. And then I saw a question that came through that said, can I request an increase in a credit line from a credit card, or I guess a lender, to help reduce my debt ratio and increase my credit score? Kelly, do you have any insight on that?
I'm sorry, Katie.
Well, I think typically when people are calling to increase a credit line, it seems to me if your goal is to reduce your debt ratio and increase your credit score, if you're close to, do we usually give credit line increases if people are close to maxing out their cards?
It really goes through our lending department for the decisioning on that. However, that could be a factor in that decision making at the time, but we will probably have to table for that question.
I can maybe give some insight from a credit score and report perspective. When you ask for a credit line increase from a credit reporting and scoring standpoint, it's rarely one thing that changes. So if you are maxed out on your other cards and are trying to reduce your utilization rate, you're usually better off paying down the balances on existing cards, because when you ask for a credit line increase, in some cases, lenders will treat that as an application for new credit. So you'll see hard inquiry potentially. That can affect your scores. You could then have, if you're approved or to open a new account, especially, you would see a hard inquiry as a result of applying for that new account. You would have a brand new account, so it's new and unknown. So that's an indicator of risk. So there's very little history with it. So you're looking at least two or three other things that would be negative when you apply, even though you have now more available credit. It would offset that utilization rate because you pulled a string and everything else moved with it. So when you apply for a new account, you're going to see a hard inquiry. You're going to see a new account potentially with no history. That's a risk indicator, as I said. Several things are going to happen that are actually negative. You have an account with a very short history rather than a long one, so that could be negative initially. So there will be multiple negative things that will offset that one thing you're trying to do. So usually you're better off paying down the debts you already owe than applying for a new account to try to manipulate the score.
Thank you, Rod.
So I think Katie had to step off. So do we want to keep going with questions?
We have time for a couple more questions.
Okay. Can I throw one out there? I like the question. Why do Vantage and Fico scores differ so much? And is one more important to keep an eye on than the other? Actually, that was part of a conversation on Twitter yesterday. And the answer is they're just different scores. So FICO has their own algorithms, and Vantage Score has its own. They're kind of like the way I compare them is kind of like Ford and Chevrolet. Ford and Chevy both make cars, but they do it a little differently. And FICO and Vantage Score create credit scores, and they do it a little differently. So the numbers will be different. What you usually see is that even though the numbers are different, in terms of the risk they represent for a person, they're the same. So you can't really compare number to number. If you look at a Vantage score and a FICO score, instead look at what you should get an explanation and look at what that score means for you. You'll find out they mean the same thing. That's what's important. But I always tell people they're both real scores. They're both legitimate. Lenders use both. There's not just one FICO score. There's lots of them. So FICO scores for auto lending, FICO scores for mortgage lending, FICO scores for what we call generic scores for lots of different reasons. And they may even have different scales. So something you may not hear anywhere else, if you buy a car, a FICO score for auto lending can go to 900 instead of 850. So you would see different numbers. So it's a good idea if you're looking at scores and you're trying to figure out if your scores are getting better, get the score from one source. Of course, I would say go to Experian, but get your score from one source and stick with that source and that score so you know and are comparing apples to apples all the time. But they're both equally important and equally real.
Great. We have time for one more question, if you'd like to take that one, Rod.
Okay. So kind of back on scores, why do the three credit companies each give a person a different score? That's one of those things I would lump into the myth category. There are three credit bureaus. You have three reports, and Experian creates a report, Equifax has a report, and TransUnion has a report. But there are lots and lots of credit scores, and the bureaus don't assign them. Lenders decide which scores they use. FICO owns their formulas, Vantage Score owns their formulas. Some banks have their own custom scores. So what happens is a lender will come to Experian, for example, and say, I want Rod Griffin's credit report. We compile that report, and then we can either route it through a score that the lender selects, say a FICO 8 score. So we route the report into the scoring model that FICO owns, and that's proprietary to them. So FICO gets paid for the score, Experian gets paid for the report, and they're sent together to the lender. So that's one way scores happen. But we might also send the report directly to the lender, and then they apply their own score, so the credit bureaus don't see that score, aren't involved in any way. And with mortgage lending, we'll send a report to a third-party mortgage reporting company. That company does its own analytics and scoring and stuff and sends it to the mortgage company. So scores and reports are different and separate processes. Scores aren't part of credit reports. That's a common misunderstanding and an important one because I think people get confused. We can't help you with your score. We can't answer questions about the score, but we can tell you what's in your report and help you identify what you might be causing some challenges for you.
Thank you, Katie, Kelly, and Rod. This concludes our presentation tonight. Check your inboxes for an email containing a link to tonight's recording, and thank you all again for joining us. Have a good night.